evening. For me, it's the evening. I'm over on the East Coast, so it's about 5 p.m. here, but I am super stoked to be spending my Wednesday evening with you all. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Um, this workshop we're calling Engaging Youth Through Climate Storytelling. And again, feel free to introduce yourself. For those that are just joining, take a moment to get a blank piece of paper and a writing or drawing utensil if possible. And there'll also be a reminder to do this in the chat. And here at Climate Generation, we always like to start, before I'm even going to introduce myself, I'm going to start with land acknowledgement. And feel free to look up the land that you're on. I think Seth will share a link in the chat. So Climate Generation's building, which is in modern day Minneapolis, Minnesota, is on the stolen lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. We recognize the immense harm caused by centuries of genocide, forced relocation, boarding schools, and other forms of attempted cultural erasure and injustice. We recognize that Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and also recognize the tremendous resilience of these communities and their powerful leadership for climate change solutions. And if there's land acknowledgement, and we would be remiss not to do a labor acknowledgement, because in addition to naming the stewards and original inhabitants of this land, we also acknowledge the stolen labor, life, and humanity of enslaved Africans and their descendants who built the foundation of these United States. The impacts of slavery persist in our economic, social, and legal system to this day, as well as the painful footprint the United States has made on communities worldwide, which is often linked to our ongoing carbon footprint. And these are things that are still happening. We know, too, that those most affected by the climate crisis often have the most creative ideas on how to solve it. And, this workshop will be about storytelling, and your story matters, but there's also been a historical silencing of certain voices. So I challenge the white folks in the room as we go through this next 2 hours to not just think about their climate story and their voice, but also how it can be used to uplift those that have historically been marginalized. And now me. My name is Cassandra Ceballos, and I am the top climate manager at Climate Generation. I use both she, her, and they, them pronouns. I'm originally from the ancestral lands of the Taino, or modern day St. Croix in the United States Virgin Islands. And I currently reside on the lands of the Susquehannock people. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Seth.
Hi, thanks, Cassandra. Hi, everybody. My name is Seth Spencer, he, him. I am the Teach Climate Network Coordinator for Climate Generation. I live in Apple Valley, Minnesota, which is the traditional contemporary lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe. And super grateful that we have Cassandra here today. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about some of the other opportunities to engage in climate change education resources. But yeah, super excited to have you all here, and I'll turn it back to Cassandra.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be talking about climate stories for the next 2 hours. So to be a good, practitioner of that and lead by example, I'll share a little bit of my climate story. So like I mentioned, I was born and raised on the ancestral lands of the Taino, or St. Croix. And my family has been there for many, many generations, and have, had a mixed lineage throughout that time. Specifically, St. Croix has always been a agricultural hub of the Caribbean. It used to be called the Garden of Eden of the Caribbean. And so my climate story really starts with the farmers on St. Croix and the agriculture there. I did my senior thesis on the socioeconomic landscape of the agricultural system there. And I've just been inspired since I was a young child to do everything I possibly can to help protect the people that feed us. So I won't, go into it all now, but my climate story starts with the farmers and the land caretakers in the Caribbean. Before we dive in, because I'll have there'll be some moments to possibly come off mute and share, as well as share in chat. We'd just like to establish some community agreements that we hold in all of the spaces that Climate Generation brings together. So make space and take space. So basically, let's have a couple of voices in and no one dominating conversation. Speak with intention and from your own experience. Listen to understand. Assume best intent, but attend to impact. Yes and both and statements. Engage tension, but don't indulge drama. Value the process as much as the outcome. Confidentiality, meaning take the lessons, but leave the details. Ask for what you need, offer what you can. Self-care, community care, be open to learning, building, not selling, meaning converse rather than pitch. And finally, most importantly to me, is we're going to try and have fun in the next hour plus. So I know personally, I like to know what, if somebody tells me we're going to sit here for 2 hours, I like to know what to expect in the next 2 hours. There will be a couple of opportunities for light, short breaks to get up and stretch, and there will be a longer break about halfway through. That's not captured here, but generally speaking, I'm about to turn to a little interactive activity where we do some introductions. And again, I think currently our group is probably small enough. It's going to be a drawing, so we're going to want to have volunteers to, be spotlit and hopefully hold their drawing up. So we'll have a chance to hear from folks. Then I will speak a little bit about climate stories in the context of climate change before grounding it more in climate stories in the more specific context of education and climate change education. Finally, I shouldn't say finally, but close to the end, we will do a writing exercise. So for folks that have just joined us, please get a writing utensil and blank piece of paper. And then also for later on, for the writing your climate story time, please get like a Google Doc or Word doc started, or if you're a hand writer, maybe a journal, because we'll go through a series of 5 prompts for 7 minutes each. And then depending on what time is looking like and how our audience is at that point, I'll invite some folks that are wanting to share not necessarily what they wrote, perhaps what that experience felt like. Whatever it is that, is surfacing for you, there'll be hopefully, if I can keep my talking to a minimum, opportunity to share. And then finally, we'll have some questions and closing reflections. So that's it from me for now. And so now I'm going to give folks, we're doing good on time. So I'm going to give folks 10 minutes if they'd like. Feel free to go off camera. I probably will, and I'll set a timer. And we'll come back at 20 minutes past the hour, and just, get some colors if you'd like, whatever it is that surfaces to you, but think and draw what climate change looks like to you. I'm gonna give folks a couple more minutes to finish up. But if anybody is feeling, I'm gonna show my drawing that I did years ago, and it's not very good. So know that you do not have to be an artist for this. But if somebody is feeling brave, if you want to put in the chat your name, or so we can get a list going, feel free to do so. And I just ask that you come off mute and turn your video on so you can hold up your drawing, if you'd like. If not, then we're gonna end early tonight because I did budget for some brave souls to step up. Well, I think people just that they're gonna feel good about their drawing skills after they see mine too. All right, we got one more minute here. So if you're working on a Picasso or a masterpiece, try and get that wrapped up. And we're gonna shift. Awesome. I saw we've got one brave soul. I hope that turns into a waterfall, a domino effect. I'm gonna go ahead and share mine. So I actually, full disclosure, I was interviewed for some of my work at a previous job a couple of years ago, and as part of the interview, at the beginning, the folks that were running it, and I do apologize because I don't remember their names, but I got their blessing. They asked me to draw what climate change looked like to me, and I thought that was beautiful, a beautiful way, especially to start conversation about storytelling. Because some people don't think that they're drawers or they're writers, but we're all writers and we're all artists in our own way. So this is what I drew years ago, and I still stand by it. I drew this sad earth crying, and she's on fire, and she has a speech bubble that says, "Why have you forgotten me?" Because again, it's really about the earth and the tenders of the earth and the caretakers of the earth that got me started. And so often when I think about what climate change looks like, I see all the things that aren't human centric that are being affected and that are dying and being impacted by humans. We are the harbingers of this. And so we seem to have forgotten every other living thing and every other connected system. So that's what climate change looks like to me. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and invite, and I'll spotlight people as they raise their hand. So I will spotlight Seth, since he has volunteered to go.
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. So I did a similar one where I also drew the earth and tried to draw the land and just put folks kind of shouting out, it's too hot, too much water, not enough trees, and generally distress, because I do see that we're all going to be impacted in different ways.
And I'm going to now spotlight Ross, who has also kindly volunteered to share his story. Lisa, I see you holding yours up. You could go next if you'd like. Oh, wonderful.
Hi.
Go.
Sorry. So I come from a physics teaching background, so I got like a greenhouse effect thing going, and then I started to look at some of the impacts of it, same as what you all have, and you're seeing through this graph of my like kids' art from school. So that's what I have.
Yeah, if you paid attention to mine, there's actually a doodle of a palm tree on the other side of the page that was peeking through. So we're all about reduce, right? Reuse is always before recycle. Lisa, I will spotlight you now.
So I was trying to show that the inequality of it as well, and people are affected differently, that there will still be some biodiversity, but it's going to be in much smaller areas. And that I can imagine a world that's very, very dry, but with extreme weather events. My drawing ambitions are greater than my drawing skills, shall we say. And then smoggy air and a lot of deaths related to climate change. So little graveyard.
I'll say you managed to squeeze a lot in there, and I understood it. So that was awesome. I really liked also the emphasis that there will still be biodiversity, there will still be people safe. It's about who and where, right? I'll give it one more beat. If you don't want to put in chat, if you want to use the raise your hand feature, if we want to get one more person willing to share their drawing. All right, Eva.
Hi. Mine's not very good, but I just tried to depict like smog and death.
Are you
I think I accidentally muted you, Eva. Can
Okay.
please come back on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, depicting a lot of heat and smog and difficulty breathing and death and an earth that has difficulty growing things and that sort of a thing.
Thank you for sharing. And then Elsie, did I see you raise your hand? Or did you want to share your drawing? Wonderful. Let me spotlight you really quick. You're also on mute.
So here it is. I'm not a Picasso. I'm not a Picasso, but in Puerto Rico, most of the damage done is by flooding, by rainfall. So this is my river flooded, and this is the rain. And I believe that we get a lot of people missing their homes on top of their houses. It's very, very impressing, especially for children. Yeah.
I will say for those that aren't aware, so Elsie is based in Puerto Rico and I'm from St. Croix, and there was a Hurricane Maria that came through in 2017 that affected both of our islands pretty severely. And I know that in Puerto Rico, it's just striking to me for you to say that, because I know in Puerto Rico, some of the worst damage was flooding in the mountainside, which is not thankfully something that St. Croix experienced. So I will say that, the Caribbean islands, that's one of the reasons this is so important to me. They were on the front lines. A farmer I interviewed for my thesis said we contribute not by not. The Caribbean contributes nothing to climate change, yet suffers some of the worst of its effects. So that's one way that I see Elsie try and highlight the voices of those most impacted, yet least contributing. Wonderful. I'm going to bring us back to our PowerPoint and take us to some big facts. I hope most of the folks in this room know these things, but it's always useful to get us all on the same page before we jump into some of the new stuff. So we'll start with some 5 key facts about climate change. First, we know that climate change is real. 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is real. Humans are causing it. And number 2, it's happening now. I'm sure all of us can think about some impacts of climate change in our own local communities. As I talk, if you would like to think about some of the impacts you have experienced or your neighbors have experienced, feel free to share those in chat. Those are always super powerful for other people to read, because we are all impacted by climate change, but we're impacted in different ways and to different degrees. And so please feel free to share some impacts you've felt or people that you know have felt. It's super helpful to have those examples. Third, we know that humans are causing it. So climate change is real, it's happening now, and humans are causing it. It is fundamentally driven by the extraction and burning of fossil fuels in the global economy. Many folks and countries have benefited unequally from the political, social, and economic benefits of burning fossil fuels, while other folks have suffered greatly as a result. We are continuing to add large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. There are still things like the Willow Project being greenlit here in the US and around the world. So despite the fact that we know it's real and happening now, we're still continuing to cause it. So fourth, it is urgent and dire that we start reversing that and addressing it now. Communities of color and low-income communities have experienced the impact of climate change for decades. There are places like the Maldives that are underwater, and it's urgent to address because it's already been impacting those folks. And unfortunately, as it starts to affect white folks more frequently, there might be some action, but it's important to know who's been doing the work and advocating from the beginning and who's always known as urgent. And finally, to bring it to a hopeful note, we also know that we have the solutions. what I worked on before coming to climate generation was something called multi-solving. And basically that's a word to say, how can we address the climate change crisis in a way that makes the world better for people and other living things now? We have solutions like bike lanes and edible orchards and electric school buses. We know how to reverse the climate crisis. It's really about a matter of political willpower. And that's actually where storytelling comes in. And I'll be getting to that shortly. But as a kind of appetizer to talking about storytelling, I'd love to pause and ask folks before we get into some storytelling stuff, what is your experience talking about climate change? Personally in your work, do you talk about it often? Do other people around you talk about it often? When you talk about it, how do you talk about it? Is it hopeful? Is it, the grief that you hold? What are some ways that you talk about climate change in your life? And I'll give folks a couple minutes to answer that question. And Seth, if you'd be willing to just read out a couple, I think it could be great for folks to hear. We won't spend too long on that. And if folks aren't really ready to share, that's fine too. I know they might just need some, oh, there we go.
Yeah, Kimberly writes, I discussed it in the Earth portion of my Earth and Space Science class and in my ecology portion of my biology class.
And I
And-
venture to guess, Kimberly, that that's probably in a more scientific way since it's science classes. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to share a couple of the kind of ways that folks are seeing climate change while we're waiting for a few more responses of flooding from extreme rain in New York City the last couple of weeks, County Park being heavily damaged by a derecho from extreme weather events, massive loss of wildlife and cattle in Kenya. Talked about with people in California about wildfires, flooding, hurricanes. It's been a pretty rough decade for California, and most people seem to be in a bubble until it truly directly affects them, and that is the challenge right there, Lisa. Talk about climate change with students all the time, and focus on solutions and taking action.
Wonderful. Continue to, or Elsie, sure, go ahead. If you're on mute, if you'd like to come off mute, I'd love to hear another voice chime in.
Okay, you can hear me now? Yes. Okay, just like Seth, I speak to students and I let them know what they can do to help or contribute to not contributing to the crisis. So also personally, I compost, I also recycle, and I have plants, and in my work is basically with students, as an educator, it's really important to get knowledge of what can be done, because students will do it. Students will cooperate and they will pass the word on to their parents and their friends and their community. So that's a way that we can contribute.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Elsie.
Thank you.
I'm on to our kind of the primer of getting into the specifics of what climate stories are and why climate storytelling. So to start it off with, why are we here today? Why is it important to talk about climate change? Well, it's important because not a lot of people are doing it, it turns out. According to the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, which we got this graphic from, opinion polls show that 70% of Americans, and this was from a couple of years ago, so I think it might actually be greater now, 70% of Americans understand that climate change is happening, and they report being at least concerned about it, if not incredibly concerned. And they know that it will affect future generations. However, so we've got more than 2/3 of Americans saying that they are concerned about it and that it's urgent now. And less than 1/3 of those same people report regularly talking about climate change. So what's that about? You know, like we've got so many people thinking about it and knowing that it's bad, and we've got very few people talking about it. So that's a disconnect. However, like I mentioned earlier, one of the greatest ways that we can impact the climate change crisis is by public opinion and swaying laws. And so by talking about climate change more, we can start to influence public opinion and political will. Where does storytelling come in to that, though? What is the power of storytelling? Well, for a very long time, the way that we have talked about climate change, when we talk about it at all, tends to be from a scientific perspective, whether that's in the classroom, in the news, with other folks that if you work in it, it tends to be from the scientific, very greenhouse gas focused, very fossil fuel focused. And while we know the science is real and we know the science is absolutely essential, many folks that will go over their head. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So we can talk at people till we're blue in the face about the numbers and how we're on our way to 2.0 and da 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 da. But what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And that's where storytelling comes in, because stories place facts and figures into context. It's one thing to say New York City received 3 inches an hour and it was the most historic flooding that ever happened. It's another thing to say that, you know, here's somebody's personal account. If I started the day fine, and then by 10 a.m. there was a foot of water in my basement, and then by 12 noon it was up to my first floor. You know, hearing that personal account of how they experienced the New York flood is going to be much more impactful and probably galvanizing than just hearing, oh, there was 3 inches an hour and it was historic. Fundamentally, our behaviors and beliefs stem from our unique identity, worldview, and value systems. So all of our stories are going to be different. All of our stories can contribute to stopping the climate change crisis. There is power in starting with all the other things that would be better in a climate harmonious world than just starting with the climate facts. So there's your personal account of climate change. And then, as we'll get to during the writing part, what does a climate secure and equitable future look like? You know, what are the stories of that too? What are the stories of hope? The way we get to the stories of hope is by moving through some of the grief of climate stories, of climate change. To iterate an example, I just said showing people research shows that showing people research doesn't work, and now I'm going to show you a research article. In 2005, the International Rice Research Institute, I just love this. They used a radio soap opera called Homeland Story. So this is a fictional soap opera to persuade millions of rice farmers in Vietnam to stop spraying their crops with harmful insecticides. And farmers who listened to the soap opera series were 31% less likely to spray their crops than farmers that were simply told that it wasn't good for them. Like, that is impactful. That is statistically significant. There is power in storytelling. Fourth, we are all eyewitnesses, as we've probably already realized in the almost hour we've been together, or sorry, 40 minutes we've been together, that we've all can name ways in which we've witnessed climate change impacts at this point. And if not us personally, at least somebody that we know and probably hold dear. So it's no more of relying on, you know, folks reporting from Antarctica or far reaches of the world. You don't have to travel farther than your back door or down your block to witness the impacts of climate change. And while we're often told that the person in the front of the room, today that happens to be me, is the expert, that's not true. Climate stories empower us all to be our own experts, because you have your lived experience, and that is different from everybody else's lived experience. Your eyewitness of climate change, or eyewitness account of climate change, is just as powerful and meaningful as other folks' eyewitness account of climate change. Everyone has a story to tell, and it's time we start telling them so we can use collective voice to make a difference. Stories also help balance the science. I won't go too much into it because we've already kind of talked about that this afternoon, but climate situation is a reality and an undisputed fact, and how we address it is about political will. Stories can shape and impact political will. It can help balance the science when folks are testifying in front of Congress, One thing that folks have done with the stories that they've written through this workshop is they'll write a letter to the editor, or they will literally go and testify in front of Congress. And again, somebody talking about their personal lived experience of going through a New York City flood is going to be a lot more impactful than some suit and tie person rattling off numbers, right? Think about the emotional appeal. And speaking of emotional appeal, climate storytelling is a way to process grief. There is a whole spectrum of emotions when learning about and dealing with climate change, from loss and despair and to hope and resolve. I personally have experienced much climate grief when Maria hit my island, and I'm sure that there are many of us here today, that have experienced climate grief through reading the news in places far away or from personal experiences. Trauma associated with climate change can have enormous impacts on our mental, social, and spiritual well-being. And storytelling can be a way to unpack, understand, and work through some of that pain to get to a point where you're able to look towards solution and hope. It's possible the grief can serve as a transformational catalyst that can end up galvanizing us. It's a path to healing. So we've been talking about climate storytelling this whole time, but really, what is a climate story? Well, a climate story is anything you want it to be. We will end this afternoon with a series of reflective writing prompts, like I mentioned. However, I want it to be very crystal clear. I'm going to lean forward so you really get me. These writing prompts are not meant to be your climate story. These writing prompts are meant to help you start thinking about what your climate story might be. My experience of these prompts is that usually some nuggets or some strings of thought come through and you realize, oh, this is where my brain is going thinking about climate change. And that could be your climate story. We've had people write poems. We've had people do spoken word. We've had people do art pieces. We've had people do, just plain writing. Whatever it is that feels right for you, whatever topic that is your climate story. I'd also like to add that folks have multiple climate stories. Some of my colleagues have written and published multiple climate stories on our storytelling collection because we all have different experiences, sometimes multiple experiences. So also don't feel like you have to cram your entire climate story into one thing. Feel free to do so. Let me know how you did one about it, because I personally like to know. But just know that a climate story is anything that feels right to you. So we've talked about the power of storytelling, how it can help balance the science, what it is, and what it isn't is nothing, because anything can be a climate story. But why climate stories? Well, climate storytelling, as we've covered, can help break the spiral of silence. Often some folks feel like talking about climate change is taboo, or because it's so politically charged, they're going to, cause a, issue. But by just simply talking about it more often, we destigmatize it, we break that kind of taboo feeling, and we normalize talking about climate change. It also helps us discourage internalization of despair and anxiety. This summer has been unprecedented with climate change impacts. I know in Minnesota, there was wildfire smoke. Down here in Baltimore, there was wildfire smoke. Up in New York, there was wildfire smoke. I have lived in the States for 10 years, and I have never experienced anything like that. And if I didn't have people in my life that I could look around and be like, WTF with, I don't know what I would have done. So by just talking about it more, we can kind of not internalize that despair and anxiety. And we realize that we're not the only ones looking around and being like, WTF, because this stuff is, it's quite upsetting, but talking about it can, build some camaraderie and give you some relief. It helps combat pluralistic ignorance. So we can more easily, break down threads of disinformation that might pop up when we talk to somebody about climate change. And also, climate stories are powerful and should be used because you are a trusted messenger with credibility in your own spheres of influence. Your students probably take your word as like the gospel. And so if you're talking about climate change, exactly like Elsie said, if you're talking about climate change more often and in ways that aren't just focused on grief, but also the hope and solutions and how we combat it, they're going to be impacted. You're influencing them in your own sphere. So wherever that is, whether it's your workplace or with your family, or as I have taken to doing, I will talk about climate change with the receptionist at my auto shop. I have done that at several different auto shops, right? Wherever you are, you can always influence it. It also builds self and collective efficacy. I think we've touched on that one. I'm realizing I've been talking at you for a while, so I'm gonna get us to a break real soon. Builds self and collective efficacy, and it's also a tool to connect, educate, advocate, and overcome. And I hope that as we go on this evening, you'll see how that is true. So I promised you a stretch break. So take a moment. You can go off camera if you'd like. Take like just a minute, really, if you want to get up from your chair, stretch, do what you got to do, and I'll be right back. Awesome. We'll have a longer break in shortly, so bear with me. We're almost there. We're almost there. So many of you probably came because you might have heard about this or the Teach Climate Network, or I know many of you are educators. So what about climate stories in education? Well, climate stories can be powerful tools for engagement, advocacy, and empowerment for students. They're a great way to learn about the diversity of students' lived experience and understand how they make sense of the world. Framing climate change in the context of stories helps students understand the ways it personally affects them. And really, I should lead with this. Writing your climate story is super powerful to then share with your students, because if you allow yourself to be vulnerable and really think about the grief of climate change, but also all the hope, because we do have the solutions and there are people around the world that are effectively addressing the climate crisis, modeling that for students, I cannot overstate how powerful that is for you as the person standing in front of the room, as the educator, to say, hey, this shit sucks and we can overcome it. You model vulnerability, you model perseverance, you can exercise skills in writing, literacy, science. There's so many ways that you can engage your students simply by telling your story. If you make it into a more creative activity like drawing, that gets different parts of their brains and interest going. So starting with your climate story, before you bring stories to them and ask them to write their story, starting with your own, I always suggest as a entry point. And then when you've shared your climate story, they probably feel braver, more empowered, and more easily vulnerable to share what their lived experience so far has been of climate change. And that opens up so many doors to you. You learn, I'm sure, so much about a student's life outside of that classroom when you learn about their experience of climate change, because we know how some of the socioeconomic variables tie in to folks' experience of climate change. So not only does it help you understand the way that they're experiencing the world, by reflecting that back to them, you can also help them start to contextualize how they make sense of the world. One story I had the privilege of reading is Diamond Spratling, and she's somebody that we've partnered with a couple of times. She founded this nonprofit called Girl Plus Environment, and she grew up in Detroit. And then when she was a young teenager, her family moved to the suburbs, and she wrote about never not liking Detroit until she moved to the suburbs, because in the suburbs there were sidewalks and there was grass and you could go outside and play. And she didn't realize that she was missing all that when she lived in Detroit, because that had been her whole world before moving to the suburbs, right? And so maybe as a teacher, if you read about that, you're able to help that student contextualize, well, why might it be like that, right? Students sometimes don't understand. They see the world as a bit more fair than us sometimes, and they don't understand why the world is such a big bad place. And we can help them make sense of that, I think, through climate storytelling. I'll end this little part by saying that we do have a climate storytelling lesson for the classroom. Seth, feel free to share that link now. It's very similar to the process we'll be going through later, or you can share it later. I'll mention it again later. But before we go into our longer 10-minute break, I wanted to see if anybody, after what I've shared in the first part of this hour, feels like they can kind of already see how storytelling can complement or uplift the work that you're currently doing. What does it add that might be missing? I'm not saying y'all aren't doing wonderful work, I'm sure everyone is, but like, how do you see storytelling kind of augmenting that, uplifting it, expanding upon it? And I'll give people 2 minutes to think about that. Oh, Elsie, if you'd like to jump in, and then I'd love to hear from somebody that hasn't spoken yet.
Yes, I just think that if you use storytelling with your students, the students themselves can look up their politicians in their area and send them those climate stories, sharing with them what they think that could be better, they could do better to prevent what happened or the dangers that they had during a system or during a climate change situation. So I think that is very helpful, and also it gets the students involved in the politics. They know that there's politicians that are there to make changes and to help them. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Karen, how do you see storytelling possibly complementing or uplifting your work?
What I like about storytelling is I really focus on solutions, and so I'm able to tell my story of working with city council and other students and other people in the community to make change. So we've been able to, for example, influence the building bylaws so that buildings are electrified instead of having power by gas. And so just those kinds of stories, I think, give the students hope, and they feel a lot more efficacy as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Wondering if we have any other volunteers that would like to share quickly. All good if not.
I can go.
Sure.
Um,
And then I'll let us go on a break.
Okay. Well, I was just gonna say that it definitely adds like emotion, and whenever you're just given a bunch of information without the feeling that's part of it, it can bounce off and not soak in very easily. So whenever you can connect with other people in a way that shows your shared humanity and shared struggle, it's super powerful.
And yeah, folks, I'm sure you'll see, I'm just seeing the chat because I stopped sharing screen. People have been sharing some really wonderful ways that it can uplift and why climate stories. Awesome. So I will give us now a 10-minute break. We will come back at 1 minute past the hour, and then we will go into our reflective writing. So if you're getting tired of my voice, it is slowly coming to an end. And I will see everybody a minute past the hour. Thank you. And you'll see if folks joined us a little later, there's a request up on the screen to please get a Google Doc or Word doc started, or grab a journal and a writing utensil if you're old school, typewriter even, non-discriminatory writing device. And we will get started now. Okay, so please grab some place to collect your thoughts, and excuse me. We are going to enter a reflective writing activity. And so after this slide will be the first prompt, and there'll be a series of 5 prompts. You will have 7 minutes to write for each. I'll keep a timer. I'll let you know when it's time to move on to the next prompt, but feel free to keep writing if that is what feels right. I know if many of you are educators, it can kind of be hard to color outside the lines, but to be honest, you don't even have to respond to any of these prompts. If you kind of already have an idea of what your climate story is, go for it. This is like a kind of a no rules time. So what I'll do is after 7 minutes, I'll come off mute. I'm gonna have my video off so you can see the screen fully. And I will say, the next prompt is ready when you are. And then I will move on. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or send it in chat. Although I hope that you kind of focus on this reflective writing exercise. And yeah, I'll pause briefly if anybody has any questions about what we're about to do. Otherwise, let's get started. So we're at about 3 minutes past the hour. So the first prompt, well, technology, okay. First prompt is tell us, and this is the only one I'll read. The next ones I'll just say the next prompt is ready when you are, and I hope you'll read it from the screen. Tell a story about an experience that helped shape the person you are today. next prompt is ready when you are. The next prompt is ready when you are. Next prompt is ready when you are. Final prompt is ready when you are, and we'll come back together in 7 minutes. All right, we have about a minute left of writing, so if folks want to bring their attention back, you can take the next couple of minutes to stretch, take a break if you've been sitting here this whole time writing, and let's continue writing if you'd like, but I'm encouraging folks to take a break, stretch, get up and move around, and we'll come back at 40 minutes past the hour.
You are currently muted, Cassandra.
Can you see my screen though? Awesome. I was saying that folks can probably tell how the color has changed, that the sun has gone down since you last saw me 35 minutes ago. But we continue onward. So I want folks to remember, first and foremost, that your climate story is whatever resonates with you. It is whatever form is calling to you, whether that poetry, something like a painting, drawing, written word. Your climate story is whatever narrative and method resonates with you. And now I will end with time for some logistics from Seth, and as well as sharing some resources. But if we could take possibly 10 minutes here for folks to share out anything that they would like to share out. I'm going to stop sharing now. And that could be, you can share out about perhaps something you wrote about, or how this exercise made you feel. I'm really open to anything, whatever is resonating with you. I'd love to start with folks who I haven't heard much from, if at all. And then if our eager beavers want to go, then I'll call on you. But I'd love to start with some folks we haven't heard from. So I'll give it a second, and feel free to raise your hand. And I'll call on you. Sarah.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, thank you so much for this. While doing it, I was thinking about different kind of format that might work for different people. Like I could see this as being like conversation starters as well. And if I were in a space with other people, and if I were a person who like learns best by talking, if it like that could be a useful exercise, or like having like doodling tools while thinking through these prompts. I definitely felt myself like kind of ebbing and flowing and kind of seeking distractions and then coming back, and they're big questions, and yeah, and so value. I think this piece that we're having right now, time to share out, is is part of the process. So appreciate this person as well.
Thank you for sharing. Someone else we haven't heard from or heard much from would like to share? Nikki, are you clapping as a?
It was the only thing I could find to put my hand up. Sorry. It just made me realize that because I work in the sort of with kids in the environmental space, that I already have imagined some solutions and what a world could look like. But I'm wondering if a lot of people don't talk about climate change because they haven't imagined any solutions and them living in that. Therefore, they don't even want to go there and talk about it. So this exercise really made me realize you're giving people the tools and slowly stepping them through being able to imagine other things that we could be doing. So I think it could be a really powerful thing. And I was thinking if you were doing it with students, you could do a writing prompt and just one in a session. You know, you could take your time to work through that so that there would be time for that discussion. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Nikki. And that actually echoes something Kimberly shared in the chat that I'll read out loud. And they say that what stood out for me is how adaptable this is to my classroom, like you kind of alluded to, Nikki, and how this can accommodate students with reluctance to share or students with disabilities who struggle to write their ideas. I want to also briefly comment on what you said, Nikki, about hard to talk about it because of getting to the solutions. And one of our colleagues at Climate Gen actually, in working with educators, identified educators saying that one of the reasons why they struggle to talk to their students about climate hope and overcoming anxiety is because the educators themselves feel so pessimistic and so overwhelmed with the realities of climate change. And that was actually a slight inspiration, I believe, for this workshop, as well as a complementary project we're working on. It is really tough and there is a lot of grief in it, but if we don't find a way to talk about it in a way that is productive, we're never going to get anywhere. And the children are our future, like Whitney Houston, the philosopher, said. So trying to find a way for ourselves to have hope is definitely the first step in trying to instill, because they'll read through bullshit, right? Students know when you're BSing them. Would anybody else like to share? Yes, Elsie. Yeah, we've been patient. Yes, please share. Elsie, you're muted.
I just want to mention that the world would look better for me if all the governments would get together and realize that they're there to protect us and that they're there to make to protect us, and that the governments have to work together to lead the efforts for renewable energy. Otherwise, we're not I mean, the sun alone will solve our problem, our electrical problem for the whole globe with very little energy. However, you know, there's a lot of talks and a lot of conventions and a lot of events which don't get to anything. So we have to push as educators, we have to push, I believe, so that there's a reaction. Students could get in touch, like I said before, with their politicians. Students could learn that they do have the power to change because they're going to be carrying it on their shoulders. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that with you, and thank you.
Thank you. I'll give it one more awkward pause before we move on. Eva.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate this succinctly, but I feel like a cultural shift needs to happen, because like pride is such a big problem. And whenever we can't ask for help or admit that we're wrong, it really kills us, it kills the earth, it kills humanity. And so it's such a neat thought in my mind to think about how being vulnerable in your weakness and in your need of help actually makes you stronger as a humanity, as the earth and all of its inhabitants. It makes us all stronger whenever we can be dependent on each other instead of just ourselves. It also relieves stress and helps our mental wellness better. It helps us spiritually. It helps us in every way. If we just are willing to say, we screwed up, let's do what we need to do. Let's join hands and go for it, And I think that as we're talking about the climate change issue, a key with students would be to help them see the power of numbers and being part of a community that works together. And that can be so hopeful, instead of feeling this huge weight on your shoulders and not knowing what in the world to do, but just feeling like you're going to throw up all the time, So I really appreciate this workshop so much. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I so agree. And there were some reactions, I don't know if you saw, with some hearts and nodding heads. I put in chat, like, really what got us here. For those that are familiar, I like almost the end of the book Ishmael, which I had never heard of until a storytelling virtual gathering I held in May of this year. Somebody mentioned Ishmael, and everybody else in the room was like, oh yeah, that book was amazing. And I missed that train. So I went out and I bought it, and it really is quite mind-bending. But what it has helped me realize is really ego is what got us here, and it's the opposite of ego is what's going to get us out of this problem. So thank you for highlighting that. Sorry, go ahead.
Courageous humility, and then I'll stop.
We're coming to the end of you having to hear my voice. Shortly I'll pass it over to Seth, but I did want to, it would behoove me not to leave you with some resources to go forth and do some of this work with. So first of all, there's the Talk Climate program page. If that link hasn't been shared yet, that's the program page the program that I kind of manage at Climate Generation. On that page, you'll find resources about how to write your climate story. You'll get links to our storytelling collection, and you'll find a way to also submit and share your story on our blog if you'd like. There's also on that page a link to the resource library, where you can find the climate storytelling lesson for the classroom, which follows a very similar pattern that we did in the last hour. And I think that Seth is sharing some of those links with you. And if not, I think they might be included in a follow-up email, but I don't want to speak for Seth. And then finally, you can always subscribe to the Talk Climate Digest. You can subscribe to any of our newsletters by going to climategen.org/subscribe. And I'll plug the Talk Climate Digest because that's the one that I write every month. But there's also a Teach Climate Tips that comes from Seth and his education team. And then finally, a few of you sent me some chat messages directly during this workshop with some wonderful ideas and some really long questions that I very much appreciate, but was not able to read during this time. So please feel free to reach out to me. That's my email, super simple, cassandra@climategen.org. I can't promise that I'll be able to answer you super timely or have an answer to your question, but I will do my very best because I really care about this, and I really care about y'all's success in bringing this forth into the world. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Seth.
Well, thank you so much, Cassandra. We really appreciate you sharing us through that journey. And I'll be very brief. This workshop today was just one, well, it's actually the second of our 9 series workshops on supporting educators in teaching climate change education and climate justice. And as Cassandra said, would love for you to join the Teach Climate Network. I will send all the links in a follow-up email, but we do, of course, have curriculum, professional development opportunities, and that culminates in our annual Summer Institute for Climate Change Education, which usually happens in June or July every year. But yeah, just thanks so much for joining us today. And Cassandra, I'll pass it back to you, I think, with some Q&A.
Well, for the sake of time, getting into something that I can't fully answer, I've shared my contact information with you all. If you have questions or some follow-ups or ideas, please feel free to reach out to me. I think Seth shared if nothing else, get my email, because I'll be able to point you to the other things that you need. And I just want to say thank you for holding on for 2 hours on this Wednesday evening. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you appreciated some of the jokes I made and groaned appropriately at the ones that didn't quite land. And it was a pleasure to share this space with you this evening. So, I'll keep it open for a little bit longer, but feel free to mingle out. And thank you.